My name is Chad. Welcome to Open Your Reality. You know, there are certain rabbit holes that sound ridiculous at first. And then you start looking at the details. And suddenly you realize why people get pulled into these rabbit holes. And one of these strange ones is the connection between Donald Trump, Nikola Tesla, number 88, and yes, Back to the Future. Now, before we go any further, let me say this clearly. I'm not saying that Donald Trump is a time traveler. I'm not saying Nikola Tesla built the time machine. I'm not saying Back to the Future is a secret documentary. But what I am saying is this. There are some very strange overlaps going on. And if you're the type of person who believes reality might be more symbolic, more scripted, or more patterned than we've been told, then this is one of those stories that make you stop and say, Now let's start with the number 88. This is a very interesting number. In the Back to the Future movie, which I'm sure you've all seen, the DeLorean has to reach 88 miles per hour in order to travel through time. And that number became quite iconic. It wasn't 87, not 90, not even a strict 100 miles an hour. It was 88. Now, why 88? Well, maybe the writers just picked a number that looked cool on the dashboard, and honestly, that may be the very simple explanation. But from a symbolic perspective, 88 is fascinating. The number 8 is associated with power, cycles, money, authority, karma, and infinity. And if you turn the 8 sideways, it becomes the infinity symbol. So when you double it, 88, you get this feeling of doubled power, doubled cycles, or a gateway between timelines. And here is where the Trump connection comes in. If you use simple ordinal gematria, this is where A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and so on, and you spell out the name Trump, well, guess what? 80 equals 88. T is 20, R is 18, as you can see here, U is 21, M is 13, P is 16. And if you add all of them together, you get 88. So the most famous time travel movie in history uses 88 miles per hour as the magic number. And the name Trump equals 88 in simple gematria. Now, does that prove anything? No. But is it weird? Absolutely. And it gets even stranger. The phrase Back to the Future equals 176, which is the same basic gematria pattern. And so, what do you think 176 divided by 2 is? Well, it's 88. Double the power, and you have Back to the Future. So Back to the Future equals 176. 176 equals 88 doubled. Trump equals 88. And the Back to the Future DeLorean uses 88 miles per hour for time travel. And again, this may all be coincidence, but these are the things that I put together in my off time. And if you're looking at this through the lens of symbolism, numerology, or even simulation theory, this all starts to feel like one of those glitches in the code. And then there is Biff Tannen. In Back to the Future Part 2, we see an alternate version of 1985 where Biff becomes a wealthy, powerful, arrogant casino tycoon. Does that remind you of somebody? He lives in a huge tower, and he has his name plastered everywhere. He's loud, he's brash, he's a celebrity businessman. And for years, people online have pointed out that Biff feels a lot like Donald Trump. But here's the thing. That's not random internet speculation. The writer of Back to the Future has publicly said that the future tycoon version of Biff was inspired by Donald Trump. So this part is not just people forcing a connection after the fact. There really was a Trump influence that was baked into the character. And that makes the whole rabbit hole a lot more interesting. Because now Trump is connected to the movie, not just symbolically through the number 88, but creatively through the character of Biff. And then we get to Tesla. And this is where history enters the story. Nikola Tesla died in 1943 at the New Yorker Hotel. And after his death, the government became interested in his papers because Tesla had made claims about advanced technology, including what some people would call a death ray. Now, one of the people brought in to review Tesla's papers was none other than John G. Trump, and that was Donald Trump's uncle. John G. Trump was not some random guy. He was an MIT electrical engineer and physicist. He had real scientific credentials.
But my uncle was a professor for years.
I even talk about my uncle was a professor at MIT. My uncle was one of the top people at MIT.
But I'm smarter than him. I'm smarter than anybody.
And after Tesla died, he was involved in reviewing Tesla's materials. So let's just pause here, okay? Donald Trump's uncle reviewed Nikola Tesla's papers after Tesla died. That is a real historical connection. And we all know that Tesla was probably the greatest scientist of all time, right up there with Newton. And even when Einstein was asked, how does it feel to be the greatest scientist of the age? Einstein said, I don't know, you'd have to ask Tesla. So that's how acclaimed Tesla was by his peers. And really, he didn't have peers. So, does that mean the Trump family inherited time travel technology? No. But it does give the mythology more fuel because Tesla has become a mythological figure in modern culture. He was all about electricity, frequency, vibration, wireless power, technology that may have been hidden from humanity, and sadly, our world could have been very different at this point, but that's for another video. So when people hear that Trump's uncle examined Tesla's papers, their minds naturally start to ask questions. What did he see in those papers? Was everything really dismissed? Were any ideas taken? Were there any discoveries quietly buried?
What if I told you Donald Trump's uncle, John G. Trump, was one of the last people to examine Nikola Tesla's secret research? When Tesla died in 1943, the FBI seized his papers, notes on free energy, death rays, and possibly time travel. But instead of being locked away forever, they were given to a government scientist for review. That scientist? John G. Trump. He spent 3 days analyzing Tesla's files, later claiming they were nothing of significance. But what if that was a lie? John Trump specialized in high-voltage energy and radiation, just like Tesla. Some believe he uncovered something groundbreaking, something the world wasn't ready for. And here's where it gets even stranger. Donald Trump has hinted at having knowledge of things beyond our time, once even mentioning his uncle's insights into nuclear and secret technology. Could there be hidden knowledge passed down? Did John Trump discover something in Tesla's work that shaped the future, or even altered it? Maybe the real question isn't what John Trump found, but who has it now?
Symbolically, it's wild. The man connected to Tesla's secret papers dies the same year the most famous time travel movie ever is released. And that movie later becomes connected to Trump through Biff. And Trump equals 88, and 88 is the speed required for time travel, and that is why these rabbit holes never quite die. Because the details are just strange enough to keep people wondering. Now let's talk about Tesla himself. Tesla was obsessed with numbers, vibration, energy, and frequency. He allegedly had a special fascination with the numbers 3, 6, and 9. And I'll admit, some quotes attributed to him about those numbers are often debated, but the larger point remains. Tesla's legacy is deeply tied to the idea that reality operates through frequency and hidden mathematical patterns. And that matters because the Trump 88 Back to the Future rabbit hole is not really about politics. It's about the idea that reality may be encoded, that numbers might matter, that pop culture might reveal patterns before they fully manifest, that movies, symbols, and names may not be as random as we assume. And this is where we get into simulation theory. Because if reality is a kind of simulation, then symbols repeating across time would make absolute sense. Names would echo and numbers would repeat, and historical figures would appear as archetypes. Movies would predict real events. Not because Hollywood has a crystal ball necessarily, or The Simpsons, but because everything is being generated from the same symbolic source code. And maybe that's why certain stories feel prophetic. Maybe that's why certain movies seem to know things before they happen. Maybe that's why people look at Back to the Future and say, wait a minute, why does this feel like it's pointing at something? Now, the skeptical explanation is quite simple. The human brain is a pattern-making machine, and we are designed to find connections. And sometimes those connections are meaningful, and sometimes they're completely imaginary. But if you look hard enough, you can connect almost anything to anything. And that is the real danger. It's even the danger of gematria, trying to connect everything with numbers. So you can lose yourself in patterns that lead nowhere. But at the same time, dismissing every coincidence as meaningless can also be lazy, because sometimes patterns do reveal something. Maybe not literal time travel, maybe not secret technology, but maybe it reveals something about the collective unconscious, about how culture works, about how symbols repeat, about how power, media, technology, and mythology are all really interconnected. And to me, the most interesting question is not, is Trump literally a time traveler? Although that's a great question. The better question is, what if time travel is not what we think it is? What if time travel is not a man stepping into a DeLorean and vanishing in a flash of lightning? What if time travel is predictive power? What if certain people, families, institutions, or governments have access to information before the public does?
Tell us this.
Maybe it's the calm before the storm.
What storm is it?
You'll find out.
What if they have a machine to see the future and can guide society toward the future they want? In that sense, the real-time travelers may not be traveling through time, they may simply control the timeline. And that brings us right back to Tesla. Tesla represented a future that may have been delayed. We're talking wireless energy, free energy, advanced technology, advanced propulsion machines, anti-gravity. The world could have gone in a completely different direction. And then his papers get reviewed by Trump's uncle. And decades later, Trump becomes the president. Again, the name Trump equals 88. Back to the Future uses 88 for time travel. Biff was inspired by Trump. And suddenly we have this strange web of numbers, movies, inventions, and politics that begins to feel more than just entertainment. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe it's just pattern matching. Maybe we're seeing shapes in the clouds. Or maybe these stories keep resurfacing because people sense something that is a lot deeper. But I don't know. Maybe this is just all coincidence and I'm just trying to match patterns that don't mean anything. But these stories keep resurfacing because I think people sense something deeper. That history is stranger than we're taught. And I keep learning this every day. What I thought was history is not. That technology has been hidden. That pop culture is not just for entertainment, it's for something else. That numbers and symbols may carry more meaning than we understand, and that reality itself may operate more like a story than like a machine. So no, I'm not saying this proves time travel per se, but what I am saying is this. When you combine Trump, Tesla, 88, Back to the Future, Biff Tannen, John G. Trump, and the myth of suppressed technology, you get one of the strangest rabbit holes in modern culture. And maybe the real question is not whether Donald Trump went back in time. Maybe the real question is, who is controlling the timeline? And we are just now starting to notice the clues. Now, this is where the rabbit hole goes a little bit deeper, maybe even much deeper, because the Trump, Tesla, 88, and Back to the Future connection is already weird enough. But then you come across clips like this.
I'm going to tell you guys a little secret. He hasn't been alive since 1989. During that year, it's alleged that him and 3 other executives perished in a helicopter crash, but he survived somehow. You can look it up yourself. He's had many books and interviews about it, but this one very interesting article from 2019 says, longtime company official says Trump lied about narrowly avoiding deadly helicopter crash. From The Hill, a very important website you should check out is thereformation.org. And it says the crash occurred in broad daylight around 1:40 p.m. A lone camper on the ground heard a big bang overhead and as he looked skyward, he saw a helicopter break apart in midair. The 3 casino executives and Donald J. boarded an Augusta A109 helicopter around 1 p.m. Around 1:40 p.m., within 30 miles of Atlantic City, the helicopter broke apart in midair, and that downward fall caused the instant deaths of everyone on board. It was a well-documented event too. Here's the remains of the casino executives getting carried off from the crash site. And here's the remains of Donald J. Trump being carried off by New Jersey State Police. Now you guys are wondering, how is this possible? Who's this guy that was our president? That was our president for 4 years. Who is this guy? Well, this guy and this guy are 2 completely different people. What most people don't know was that Trump had 3 body doubles or doppelgangers that would go to interviews and meetings and parties for him during the Trump dynasty. And they still carried on those roles throughout the entire presidency until now. They're still playing the part. That also explains the reason why the one you see at Trump Tower playing sports is morbidly obese. It also explains why in 1990 Ivana divorced the back from the dead Donald and got custody of the children. I promise you, I'm not a hater or anything. I even voted for him. But I'd just like to tell you the truth. And there was a scene from the movie The Brothers Grimsby that happened today as well. You're watching a movie.
So that clip you just saw claims that Donald Trump actually died in a helicopter crash in 1989, and that the person we have seen ever since is either a double, a replacement, or some kind of altered version of Trump. Now let's be clear. The documented story is that on October 10th, 1989, 3 top Trump casino executives were killed in a helicopter crash in New Jersey. And I made a video about this about a year or 2 ago. But Trump himself was not on board, although reports later said he had been scheduled to be on the flight and changed plans. So the crash killed Stephen Hyde, Mark Grosinger Etes, Jonathan Benevov, and the 2 pilots. So the real story is not that Trump died. The real story is that he narrowly avoided a deadly crash that killed some of his most important people. And honestly, that alone is quite strange. Because if you're looking at this through a time travel lens, this becomes what I would call a timeline fork moment. A moment where one small decision changes everything. And if Trump gets on that helicopter, and he probably didn't, there is no President Trump decades later. There's no 2016 election, no MAGA movement, no Trump era in American politics as we know it. But he does not get on the helicopter, and the timeline continues. And by the way, in Back to the Future, where do they go? To the year 2015. And what is the year that Trump ascends to the presidency? Well, it begins in 2015. Is that a conspiracy? Or is that just a synchronicity, or what? So there's so many here. But basically, the conspiracy version says that maybe Trump not getting on that helicopter was not an accident. Maybe something happened there. Maybe Trump died in one timeline, but survived in another. Maybe a double took over. Or maybe someone with knowledge of future events knew how to avoid that flight. And again, I'm not saying that happened. But that is why this story fits so perfectly into the time travel mythology. Because in time travel stories, survival is often the only clue. Someone avoids the fatal accident. Someone makes a last-minute decision. Someone is supposed to be somewhere, and suddenly they're not. And decades later, you look back and say, was it luck? Was it instinct? Was it intuition? Or was that timeline manipulation? Now, let's bring in our second clip. This one connects Trump to John Titor. And John Titor was one of the internet's most famous alleged time travelers. Around 2000 to 2001, someone posting under that name claimed to be from the year 2036. And he said he had to come back in time to retrieve an old IBM computer. And he described a future where America had gone through a civil war and society had become fractured, simpler, and far less centralized. I want you to take a look at this clip.
Donald Trump is a time traveler.
Okay.
Okay.
No.
Okay, bro. So in 2000, on a online forum, this guy named John Titor started posting saying he was a time traveler from the year 2036. He said that he was in the year 2000 because he made a pit stop on his way to 1978 where he had to pick up this old computer. He needed this computer because in the year 2038 there was going to be this weird thing that happened with computers, and it's a real thing, which is crazy because
Y2K?
it was a Y2K type thing, but we didn't know that it was going to happen in 2000. Nobody except for the designers of that computer knew that that computer was capable of doing those things.
What does this have to do with Donald Trump?
He said he was in the year 2000 there was going to be an American Civil War between 2000 and 2036, and he was finding pictures of his family before the war broke out. That's why he made a stop in the year 2000. So where the conspiracy comes from is that Donald Trump has a uncle that worked at big computer company in like the 60s or the 70s and 80s, right?
Didn't he go to MIT or something like that
Yes.
too?
The conspiracy theory says John Titor is Donald Trump. So Donald Trump traveled back in time in order to prevent the war, which is why he ran for president. He used his uncle's time machine, and he traveled back in time in order to get himself all of this money.
So what do you think? Titor's predictions didn't exactly play out cleanly in our timeline, but that actually became part of the mythology. Because Titor also talked about divergence, the idea that traveling through time does not necessarily take you back to the same exact timeline. It just may create or enter a parallel version of that reality. So when people connect Trump to Titor, the theory becomes something like this. What if Trump, or someone connected to Trump, had knowledge of a future civil war? What if he came from a timeline where America had collapsed? What if the goal was not just to become rich, but to change the timeline itself? To stop one version of the future from happening and steer us into another version? This is where the theory starts to echo Back to the Future almost perfectly. Because in Back to the Future Part 2, Biff Tannen gets rich because he receives future knowledge. And he gets the sports almanac, and he uses information from the future to manipulate the present. And because of that, he turns himself into a wealthy, powerful, corrupt tycoon. Now look at the Trump time travel theory. Trump becomes a billionaire celebrity businessman. He builds towers. His name is plastered everywhere. He becomes a political figure. The movie's alternate timeline villain, Biff, was publicly said to be inspired by Trump. And then the theory asks, what if the reason there are so many ties to Back to the Future is because the movie was not just predicting Trump? What if it was symbolically describing him? Future knowledge, my friends. They always put it in the movies and the TV shows. Just look at The Simpsons. Wealth, power, a changed timeline, a chaotic America, and a central figure who bends reality around himself. Now again, there is a rational explanation. Trump was already famous in the 1980s. The writers of the Back to the Future movie could easily use him as inspiration because he represented a certain 1980s archetype. Wealth, ego, casinos, towers, branding, power. But the deeper symbolic question is this. Why does the Trump story keep lining up with time travel mythology? Why the 88? Why does Trump equal 88 in simple gematria? Why does Back to the Future use 88 miles per hour? Why is Biff connected to Trump? Why does Trump's uncle review Tesla's papers? Why does Trump narrowly avoid a deadly helicopter crash in 1989? And why does John Titor talk about civil war, timeline divergence, and a fractured America? And why does our current world feel increasingly like we are living inside one of those unstable timelines right now? And I'll also pose this. Why is it that Ingersoll Lockwood wrote several books about Barron Trump, Trump's son, and Trump himself? He even wrote a book called The Last President. This is too crazy to all be just coincidence. And it makes for a fascinating rabbit hole, not because it proves that Trump is John Titor, not because it proves Trump died in 1989, and not because it proves a DeLorean is hidden under Mar-a-Lago next to the classified documents, but because symbols keep repeating. Time travel, civil war, future knowledge, wealth, power, Tesla. Biff, Trump, parallel timelines. And the question becomes, are all these just coincidences? Or are we just looking at patterns? Maybe Trump did not physically travel through time. Maybe the real time travel is simply information like Project Looking Glass. Maybe whoever has access to future trends, predictive technology, intelligence networks, financial systems, secret knowledge, can act like they're a time traveler. Because if you know what is coming before everyone else, you don't need a DeLorean. Maybe they had AI 40 years ago and were using it. Maybe Project Looking Glass was real. Maybe Project Pegasus was real. Then you already have the almanac. And maybe that's the real Biff Tannen connection right there. Not that Trump literally drove through time in a DeLorean or a Tesla Cybertruck, but that his story represents the same archetype. A man who appears to understand media, power, timing, branding, chaos, and public emotion in a way that lets him bend the timeline around himself. So is Trump a time traveler? Probably not in the Hollywood sense. But is his life surrounded by enough strange symbols, near misses, and historical overlaps, and pop culture to make people question the nature of reality? Sure, absolutely. And maybe that's why this story never seems to go away. Because somewhere between Tesla's papers, the 1989 crash, John Titor's Civil War timeline, and Biff Tannen, and the number 88, it starts to feel like we're not just watching history. It feels like we're watching a timeline struggle to correct itself. Guys, this is Chad with Open Your Reality signing off. Thank you to everybody who has supported the channel. Thank you for watching until the end. I so appreciate you, and I will see you in the next video soon.
ונוע שלא